Hey, hands on top of the table, Nick. All right, here we go. Next question. Here we go. My girlfriend confessed to being a sex addict. What do I do now? I live in a rural area, and one night I met Karen when I was biking around. I invited her over for dinner that night. We started dating. We fell in love. We both live in a super, super isolated area. She lives maybe 30 miles away from the nearest home. She spends all of her time by herself, and her job is entirely online. We decided to move into the city together, and we were excited. But then, today, she sat me down, and she said she needed to tell me something, which she had been keeping secret from me. She said she used to be a sex addict, like diagnosed and everything. She just told me all this stuff about how she started having sex at 12 years old and spent most of her teens and 20s pursuing sex. She said at 15 and 16, she would go to nightclubs and just sleep with older men every week. She had never truly been able to keep down a boyfriend because she couldn't resist sleeping with other men. She said I was the first boyfriend she has never cheated on, and all of her other boyfriends were 1 or 2 month flings, and I was the first one that even remotely mattered to her and was long term. I have to say I was shocked, but I also felt really sorry for her. She literally had to leave the city and live in the country just to escape her vice. And I've noticed she has an insatiable sex drive, but I never really connected the dots that it might be a problem for her. She said she effed up every single relationship she's ever had because of her sex addiction, including her friendships. She said that she loves me, but she doesn't know how she could possibly go back to the city and not fall into old habits. I didn't even know what to say. Was she saying that if we move back to the city, she's definitely going to cheat on me? I know that what she's saying is legit. She was crying when she told me. How am I supposed to react to this? I really, really love this girl. I don't know anything about sex addiction, though. I just told her that I would think about it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's real life.
Yeah, that's a big one. Reading this or listening to you read it, I guess my first piece of advice to the listener is, this may not be as scary as it sounds. I mean, because right away, he's saying I don't know anything about sex addiction, and you're hearing this from somebody who you really care about. Your mind automatically is going to go to, oh my God, this is over.
Right.
This is gonna end in tragedy and all that. But not necessarily.
Right.
I mean, it sounds like. Did he say how long they've been together? I didn't see that anywhere. It sounds like they've been
together for quite a while.
I mean, they moved in together.
They're about to, yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like this is this is maybe one of the longer relationships for her. So something is working. So let's not forget that. Yes. Something is going right. And I realize that they live in a rural area, but unless he's the only dude in that town.
Right. Yeah.
She must be using some kind of coping skills to deal with the addiction.
Yeah.
If she's not sleeping around with other people. So even if it's a rural area, if she really wanted to have sex with somebody else, she'll do it. As the saying goes, if you want it, you find a way. If you don't, you find an excuse. Like if this wasn't under control currently, it would already be a problem. My first thought. I think the idea of moving into the city might sound scary to you and probably sounds scary to her too, because it's another test.
Yes.
When we're dealing with addiction, there's all these little markers that are going to be tests. And there are things that in early recovery that you just can't do. But later on, after you've developed some healthy coping skills, you can work yourself up to a point where you can start doing some of those activities again. The good example I always like to use for any of our clients in our program is like going to a concert.
Right.
Okay, if they just got out of rehab, going to a rock concert is not probably the first thing you should do. Does that mean you can never go again? Of course not. It means that you have to work your skills up to that point where you can go again. So this is probably scary for her going back into, from a rural area into an urban area. There's going to be more temptation. There's going to be more obstacles there. But this isn't a death sentence.
No, it's definitely not. And, so my first reaction to this, first off, that was great. I think that's exactly right. And the thing I want the audience to understand, when you hear this question, I think it's very normal for you as a listener to think, well, but is this real? And I want to start off with, did you see how Nick didn't even question that? Like, he immediately approached this like, well, I'll give you the same advice I would tell an alcoholic. I'll give you the same advice I tell you the family member of somebody who's recovering from heroin addiction, right? And so on my soapbox for a second, as a therapist, I want to just kind of say something definitively, clearly, and as loudly as I can to anybody who has ears. Sexual addiction is a real thing, okay? We're going to start with that. As with all addictions, it is also often a convenient excuse for consequences of your negative behavior. You don't get a pass from a judge because you kill a pedestrian, but Judge, Your Honor, I'm an alcoholic. I was drunk at the time. No. You're still going to face the consequences of your actions. And yes, you probably really are an alcoholic. And in the Me Too movement, we've seen guys like Harvey Weinstein, right? This big Hollywood producer. He was a sex addict. He was taking advantage of lots of people. He even raped people. And then, whenever he got called on the carpet about it, he said, whoa, everybody, okay. Listen, I'm a sex addict. I'm going to a rehab in Europe. And a lot of people took offense to that. They said, oh, isn't that convenient? Every celebrity is a sex addict. Tiger Woods is a sex addict, when they get caught cheating. As a therapist, I am always predisposed to believing the person, right? When a woman tells me I was raped, I tend to believe her or believe that the experience was traumatic and terrible for her and it felt a lot like rape. So I always take them at their word. And when a man or a woman tells me I'm a sex addict, I have this perpetual behavior, I am inclined to believe that, in part because I'm an addiction specialist and I realize that addiction is not just something you put into your body. It's not alcohol chemicals or heroin chemicals. There's also gambling addiction. And that's organic. That has nothing to do with something you put in your body.
Right.
Sex can do the exact same thing.
So that's the difference between what we call chemical addictions versus process addictions. Still work on the brain the same way. There's a little bit of a difference, but I think you're right. We've finally gotten to a point in society where chemical addiction seems to be a lot more accepted, and the research is coming in that supports it, and we understand so much more about this being a brain disease as opposed to just a fault in character or bad decision making. We're understanding so much more about it. Process addictions are another step and a half behind. They still don't have the legitimacy that chemical addiction.
I want to jump on that word legitimacy. So if you're a listener and you're wondering to yourself, is sex addiction a real thing? You got two addiction specialists saying, yes, it definitely is. But here's the deal. I'm also going to explain to you there is a huge debate that's occurring within our profession, within mental health and the science of it, regarding this issue. Earlier in this episode, we told you about something called the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5th edition. And this is like what we jokingly call it the Bible of mental health. But it essentially is a big book of labels and check marks next to those labels. If the person has the following 5 conditions, then you can use this word. And this word becomes a shorthand word to describe a set of symptoms so that we all know what we're talking about and we don't have to hand you an essay about every human, right? Even though every human's unique, this is shorthand. It's a faster way to do things. But here's the thing. When the 5th edition came out, which just happened recently, like in the last 10 years, the 5th edition came out as a big moment. It only happens like every 20, 25 years. We'd all been doing the 4th edition. And when the 5th was coming out, there was a huge debate about including process addictions. So the community was divided between two camps. And one camp was saying add gambling, okay, add gambling disorder. And they were also saying add sexual addiction, okay, call it what it is. But there was a real political divide because there's another camp within the mental health industry that says, no, if you call sex an addiction, you're going to pathologize sex. And so when somebody has a very high libido, you're going to call them a bad name and you're going to label them. And honestly, that group of people, they form around this organization called AASECT, which is AASECT. It's the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. I like AASECT, okay? They've done a lot to come at us and say, hey guys, can we all take a step back and see all sex as healthy sex? If it's consensual sex, it's healthy sex. Let's not pathologize BDSM. Let's not pathologize, role play. Let's not pathologize fetishes. And they've come a long way, and I really agree with a lot of their premises. Where we disagree is when they say, and there's no such thing as sex addiction. As an addiction specialist, I say, you know what? I don't get to define addiction. The patient does. And it goes back to what Nick said in the last segment. If there's a clinically significant pattern of distress because of this behavior and it's bothering the client and they come to me for help and they say, Jim, my sex drive is ruining my marriage. I'm doing inappropriate things at my job. I'm watching porn on my phone. I'm having a problem. Help me. Yeah, I want to diagnose that as sexual addiction. But here's the thing. Nick said legitimacy. The DSM 5th edition did not include sex addiction because the political fallout became too hot and because insurance companies were also saying, hey, if you include this, then I think we're sort of required to insure for it, right? We have to actually treat this, and this is going to get weird. Like, we're not sure what to do, and what happens if these guys have committed a sex felony, a sex crime, and sex has a very special place in the mental psyche of a population. But I'm here to tell you this. The research was done, and definitively, without question, sexual addiction is a thing. Anybody that tells you it's not has a bias. They're not following the data. And if you want to look up the data for yourself, if you're the kind of person that so hates yourself that you like to read psychological studies, you can pick up Kafka. So Kafka. He wrote an entire proposal. He called it hypersexual disorder, and it was supposed to be included in the DSM-5, and it went to the very last step of the inclusion process, and it was vetoed. And it was vetoed at the very end by a couple of members of one particular committee on the addictions panel that didn't feel comfortable with it being in there because sex was so taboo. But I actually am holding the paper. You can hear it in my mic, and I want to read you.
That could not be any other paper, by the way.
There's no other way. But I really want to read. I want to read from the study, and I'm sorry if I'm a little too passionate about this, but it bothers me. I specialize in sex addiction. This is one of the primary things I treat in my private practice, and I want the world to know it's real. But you might be out there and thinking, well, okay, I have a family member who, yeah, I've wondered if this is a real thing. Or for me, I've wondered if this is a real thing. What are the criteria? Let me tell you what the criteria are. First criteria, over a period of at least 6 months, recurrent and intense sexual fantasies, sexual urges, or sexual behaviors in association with at least 3 of the following 5 criteria. First one, a lot of time consumed by sexual fantasies, urges, or behaviors repetitively interferes with other important goals, activities, and obligations. Second criteria, repetitively engages in sexual fantasies, urges, and behaviors in response to bad mood states. 3, repetitively engages in sexual fantasies, urges, or behaviors in response to stress. 4, repetitive but unsuccessful efforts to control or significantly reduce sexual fantasies, urges, or behaviors. And 5, repetitively engaging in sexual behaviors while disregarding the risk for physical and emotional harm to self or others. There is clinically significant personal distress or impairment in their social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning associated with the frequency and intensity of these sexual fantasies, urges, and behaviors. I've actually read to you word for word the actual clinical criteria. We do not typically do that on this show. In this case, I have elected to do so, and I warned Nick that I was going to get on my soapbox because I want you, the listener, to understand the medical criteria for this problem has been written. It is encoded. We understand it. The data is in, and it is not included in popular medical pieces of literature like the DSM-5 for purely political reasons because we as a society don't know what to do if there is a proper way to address this and call this what it is. Because the Harvey Weinsteins of the world, who are isolated for proper scrutiny, and the Tiger Woods of the world, who are isolated for proper scrutiny, now have an excuse. And that befuddles us, and it makes it hard for us to understand what to do about it.
Sure. I mean, of course, there are going to be people who abuse the system.
Yes.
But there are people who abuse the system for everything else.
Yes, gamblers do that. I'm a gambling addict. Okay, but you're also going to jail. Okay, good.
Right. Well, I mean, even if they use that as a way out, even
Right.
if they don't actually meet criteria, but they say that they do, so that they can, not hold themselves accountable or not be
Right.
held accountable to the behavior. But yeah, the point is, number one, you're still held accountable regardless.
Right.
But then also number two is that we can't not treat something because some people abuse it.
Yes. Yes.
We still have to be, so if I've got a client who comes in and they tell me that, this is a problem, this is an addiction they have, as a therapist, I have to take their side. I have to treat that person. I have to give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't know that they're lying.
Yeah. And, to the writer, here's my advice to you, buddy. First, I hope that you hear in me a supportive...
Jim's down from the soapbox.
Jim has stepped down from my soapbox. I'm back to the listener. Everybody take a deep breath. Jim's okay. Jim's going to be all right. So to the writer, you believe your girl, and I applaud that. You should. And I'm here to tell you that's a real thing, and the criteria I just listed basically come down to 3 or 4 points. Has this thing become a problem in your life and it causes harm? Has this thing been something you've tried to stop doing and you haven't been successful in doing it, right? Those are like the big things that we're usually looking for. And is it something that's happening over time? It doesn't count if it's just a bad weekend. We kind of need to see it over 6 months. So, and it's not better explained by like drugs. Those are the criteria for addiction pretty much everywhere, whether we're talking about gambling or sex. So I'm explaining to you that it's a real thing. But your question is, what should I do about it? Couple of things. I want you to reconsider the move to the city.